John Cates. I have long histories that go way, way back into the hills of Tennessee, Baptist churches. My great-grandfather was a traveling minister. My grandmother was the kindest church-starting Baptist lady. I never heard her say an unkind word about anybody. My father was an absolute hero, a deacon in the church. My mother and he were active. He was a warrior all through World War II and Korea. Stories that you only read in books. I was a good boy. I went to church, I went to Bible school, but I really didn't know Christ. 1969, graduated when I was just barely 17, on my 17th birthday. A year early, came to the University of Houston, going to be a teacher, started going to college. Marijuana was just starting to make its introduction to culture. I was offered it by a girl, duh, and the next thing you know, I loved it. I loved the feeling. And I didn't stop. But I was one of those weird guys who stayed in school. I was the poster child of here's a guy who can do his dope and his dope not do him. I graduated from college. I was chairman of one of the committees with Houston Teachers Association while I taught school with HISD while I was shooting dope at night. Married my high school sweetheart. She was also just insane with me. It was posing as a teacher in the daytime and being an absolute criminal at night. I carried a gun, started dealing dope on the side. I've held the gun on people, made folks lie down in parking lots, told them I would shoot them, got so crazy I would have. When you're strung out on heroin, it kills all the emotions. Your emotions are part of your conscience. They're the major component, and if you don't have it, you don't have a conscience. I got arrested in 1975, first time, sales and possession of a record amount of heroin for Houston. The co-defendant in the case, my best friend, who was just another suburb kid like me that got all wrapped up in that crazy stuff. He decided he was going to keep on dealing and try and buy his way out of the court case. The undercover agents came to arrest him again. He thought they were junkies, ran to his bedroom, slammed his door shut, grabbed his deer rifle out of the closet, fired 3 shots through the door, hit 3 federal agents. They shot him 12 times and killed him. He was my first best friend to lose to this disease. I was still so numb that I don't remember shedding a tear. Now I was standing trial, a school teacher, sales and possession of a record amount of heroin. Co-defendant in the case had shot 3 federal agents, but he was dead and I was all that was left to try. Prosecution asked 90 years, which was worse than a life sentence. By the time I was arrested, I was down to 136 pounds at 6'1". And I was put in the old Harris County Jail. Terrified, kicking heroin. I was, going through withdrawals. You feel like you've got a horrible case of the flu. What you desperately wish is you could fall asleep. There were 36 beds. There were over 130 guys. I was cold and I was mean, but I wasn't tough. They brought in this old man, and this sounds like it couldn't, but it's the way it was. He had one eye. He was an old black guy. He had an ace bandage wrapped around his emaciated stomach. It was real loose because he was too skinny for it to fit. He had diabetes, tuberculosis. They thought in the fight somebody had cut his toe off. He was unconscious. They lay him down on the bed, and one of them says to the other, "I don't think he's going to make it through the night." I looked at this man, and I could see me. He was me. And I knew that's where I was going. And this is the hard part to describe, because all I can tell you is that at that point, every inch of my skin, every hair on my head, every eyelash, every cell in my body And it's not it is an absolute scream, an internal scream. You couldn't do it outside, not in there. But inside, every piece of me called out, God. And I fell asleep. So the steps began. While I was in jail, I did just like every other guy in jail. I went, oh, I'll never use again. I can't believe that. Well, maybe I'll smoke a little dope. You know, that kind of thing. The moment I got out, I got loaded. Within a matter of days, I did some heroin. But I was so hot and so scared that I had to move, and nobody had anything to do with me. Obviously, that first marriage blew up. I had been working for 9 months waiting for my trial in a concrete yard. I no longer weighed 136 pounds, now I'm up to 186 again. My attorney said, listen, there's this program here that has some inroads with the courts, and I'm gonna need to go in and say you're involved in a program. While I'm at the program, I start meeting people, only they're sober and I like them. And again, things start getting arranged, and I have to go to the program to con for the court case to get maybe a half of a life sentence. While I was there, at these meetings, I kept thinking, well, some of this stuff is making sense, but I'm sure I can control smoking a little dope and stuff. They were going to have a camp out, and I thought, well, the girls are cute, you know, I'll show up. They'll be able to say in court, yeah, he even goes on the social activities, you know. So I go on the camp out. I can't get loaded on the camp out, so that was my first day sober. And by the time I got back, I thought, you know, I've been hearing all about this 30 days thing and all that. I think I'll go ahead and give that a shot. Court's coming up. I have an attorney. My parents are in town. They're brokenhearted. The attorney, a fellow named Stuart Kennard, he said, I feel really bad because by this time I had 4 months sober, honest to gosh sober. He said, everybody we've ever talked to said you weren't a bad man, you know, that your heroin thing was on the side, that you weren't mixing it with the kids or anything like that. But I don't think I can get you probation. By this time, my relationship with God had grown to the point that I slept like a baby the night before court. I was looking for what was the adventure he had for me that was probably going to be in prison or jail. But I was solid in that love at that time. I was solid. The attorney gets called back to the back of the room. He comes back out in a second. He says, I don't know what's happened. He was white as a sheet. I never will forget him. I mean, this is a hardcore attorney too. Time for the sentencing, and the judge looks at me and he says, I'm going to sentence you to 90 years in prison. And he stops. And I'm standing there and he says, however, upon the advice of the district attorney's office, I'm going to give you 10 years probation. And I walked out not knowing what had happened. Nobody knew. It's 1976 by this time. Wanting to help, I opened up a school. It was the first recovery school ever. My degree was in curriculum instruction. I knew how to organize things into individually prescribed instruction modules with pre-tests and post-tests and all that. I'd been trained to do that. I was working on my master's degree in educational administration when I was arrested. So I took GED manuals, broke them down into these learning modules. I did a hand-done flyer. We ran it on a duplicator machine and handed them out at meetings. I went out and I bought 15 TV trays, brought them into my apartment, and starting at 9 o'clock every morning, students would start arriving in my apartment to prepare for the GED. And the program became huge, 3,700 young people, largest metropolitan drug abuse program for adolescents in history. It's the one Carol Burnett's daughter came into back in the 70s, People magazine. I get a phone call, well-known private investigator. As of yesterday, they pulled 24-hour surveillance off of you. Programs people brought your case to my attention. I knew you had met my son Henry, who has not made it. And I was able to get in touch with Carol Vance, and he was the district attorney at the time, and let him know some of the aspects of the case, and met with the judge and went over some things, and that's how you ended up getting that probation. Oddly enough, now I have worked with grandchildren, and of this man. After the school got going, they asked me to go into, quote, training to be a counselor. And then they sent me out to Fort Bend County to open a younger group. We call it an alternative peer group. It's where the kids and the parents come, they meet regularly, there's social functions, and it grew like crazy. They saw that happen and they went, we would like for you to be the executive director of all of the Houston, Harris County, Fort Bend County area. So I took it over and I ran it for 18 months. It grew to 23 centers. There was some trouble in Dallas. I was sent to Dallas to fix it. I ended up staying there. That's where I met Susan, my wife. It was the second largest program. It was 1,800 young people in it. So when the program blew up, it broke my heart. I didn't know what to do, so I kept volunteering. I was in Dallas at the time. The video age was coming on. It was real easy to get into. That was when I was producing and directing commercials and industrial films, because I'd been in a rock and roll band and we'd made an album and I'd been in commercials, and on the side was my plan. And I opened up Lifeway it's 1985 by this time, and that's when I opened up this program. It grew like wildfire. Between 1985 and 1992, we grew to that 11 cities in the United States and 3 in Canada, and hung out with rock and roll guys and had all sorts of high profile clients, and spoken, as I said, all over the world, and worked all over the world. Because most people think of recovery, think of Minnesota or one of the coasts, things like that. The weird thing is, it's right here in this city that a phenomena, a God-generated phenomena, has come to pass. Five years ago, I found out that I had gotten hepatitis C and B from shooting dope. Then 5 years later, a tumor showed up on my liver, and I was told I needed to have a transplant. They prep you, they lay you down on a gurney, and they head into the operating room. And at that time, if I understand correctly, you had about the same chance of surviving as going through a war. And when you lay on that bed and they roll you into that operating room, new things present themselves in your life. And you can't come to grips with them or have an opportunity to come to grips with them without something like that happening. And I can tell you that as they rolled me into that operating room, again, I was totally at peace that whichever door I came out of, it was going to be okay. The 35 years of walking, or God carrying me, gave me a sense of sureness. That's all I can describe it as. I was sure it was going to be okay. Again, I know that this is being made for Sugar Land Baptist. My brothers and sisters, and family, in all of that, were right there the whole time. My wife, Susan, she and I have been together for 36 years. Came to Sugar Land Baptist when we opened the program down here. We had 2 kids. They have been absolute wonderful, just miracles. But it hasn't all been perfect. There have been hard times. There have been times when the program failed. We've had financial difficulties. There have been times when I wasn't sure. Sugar Land Baptist is where I got to continue to grow, and it was through the people there. 2 weeks ago, I had 40 years sober. I came as a young man. Now I'm not so young. I am the story of redemption. I am the thief on the cross. I am the prodigal. It's been through Sugar Land Baptist that the friends and the support for the last 25 years has carried us and carried me. There's love there for me. There's grace there for me. There's guidance there for me. There's joy there for me. And as I face the coming things, that come with old age and facing death, I go almost with anticipation, wondering what kind of new things God's going to show me. And as I sit and talk about it, I wonder what kind of parts the people I know in this church are going to play. I'm getting to watch all this happen, and it's amazing. This is the wildest story. When I hear myself tell it, I go, what? That's incredible. That's just wild.